One of the great struggles of our time, the battle for the heart and soul of Islam. Welcome to the Week on Newsnight. This week, the struggle for the future of the Muslim faith. Is it time for an Islamic reformation? A vast swathe of the country lies underwater. What lessons can be learned for future flooding? And forget YouTube, how about a service that lets you run your own television channel? Hello, there are 1.3 billion Muslims in the world and 46 Muslim-majority countries. The diversity of the Islamic world is a wonderful strength. But does it also allow extremists to flourish? Some claim there's currently a crisis in Islam. Others that the faith is in the midst of a long-running debate between modernizers and traditionalists. Some suggest the Muslim faith needs a reformation. Well, one thing is certain. Islamic countries and Muslim peoples feel under attack and are examining the future of their religion in the 21st century. In a special edition of Newsnight on Wednesday, I hosted an extended debate on the battle for Islam. We have some of that discussion for you in a moment, but first here's our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban.
There's much debate about the golden age of Islam. Some look back many centuries to the Caliphate or the Mughal Empire, others to the 16th or 17th centuries and more recent achievements by the Ottomans. In its art, as in its debate, there is no monolithic Islam, all the more so today in what many Muslims consider a crisis. Ever since the time of the Quran and the Prophet himself, Islam has been the subject of competing interpretations. With no pope or Catholic-style holy writ to impose a view, the stage was open for noisy conflict between holy men, emirs or politicians who each thought they knew what was best and sought the biggest number of followers. Right at the start, after Muhammad's death, there was schism over the issue of who should succeed him, and that produced the Shia offshoot from the mainstream Sunni school of Islam. And in different forms, the arguments have been going on ever since. Today, many in Islamic countries feel they're under attack by America and some other countries. At the same time, sectarian killing in Iraq between Sunnis and Shias is claiming thousands of lives. Some commentators suggest a new fault line is being opened in the Middle East. Akbar Ahmed disagrees. He's recently surveyed attitudes across a wide number of Muslim countries and finds outside Iraq much admiration among Sunnis for today's Shiite leaders.
Ordinary Muslims throughout the Muslim world, as Sunni and Shia, are looking for Muslim figures, Muslim leaders who are standing up to the West, reflecting their anger, their anguish, their despair, their aspirations. And what they're finding is that leaders like Ahmadinejad of Iran or Nasrullah of the Hezbollah echo their sentiments.
But while many Sunnis may admire Iran's leaders or Hezbollah's, there's little likelihood of mass conversion to Shiism. Most Sunnis remain rooted in their own culture, even if Shiism, with its ayatollahs and more hierarchical structure, offers greater ideological discipline. In recent history, there's been intense debate between traditionalists and modernists. Access to foreign technology has required traffic with non-believers, and with that has come colonialism, the oil trade, Western military intervention. Now, those are all things that most Muslims can agree represent the ugly face of the West. But where there's less consensus is on the subject of how modern or globalized they wish to be. As the Western world became more dependent on Arab oil, various ideas began to influence the Arab street. There were the secular militants, Baathists and communists, but also the growing underground strength of the Muslim Brotherhood, a politicized religious organization seeking to take power from pro-Western rulers.
So you have all these people, they were coming with we have to rely on our Islamic values to resist colonization and to resist the Western domination. And you have mainly first something which has to be said, non-violent groups, non-violent organizations. Never forget that the starting of radicalization was the regime's repression. And for example, in Egypt in the 40s and the 50s, where people were being killed, and then by whom? By the people who were liberating the country. Jamal Abdel Nasser was the first one to put the people he was working with, the Muslim Brotherhood, in jail, and he killed the people. He started to kill them during the 50s.
But what of the recent tide of electoral success, of Hamas and of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan or Egypt? How do self-declared Islamists engage in that Greco-Roman construct, democracy, when many followers would prefer theocracy? Do they actually even believe in democracy?
If you respect the principles and you play and you respect the rules of the game, you are against violence and not killing innocent people, as in Egypt and in Jordan, you should be involved in the democratic process. But we also have to say, if you were to win, it means that afterward you respect the same rules. It's not for you to win and then to change the rules of the game.
And what about Islamists in power? Afghanistan is one of the few countries to have witnessed that, albeit the Taliban took it by force rather than getting elected. They dealt mercilessly with what they saw as modern corruption. But some believe such governments are far more comfortable with permanent opposition than the messy compromises of power.
When religious groups have taken over, as the Taliban, that's a classic case in Afghanistan, they simply collapsed because of sheer incompetence. And people ultimately don't want a man with a beard ruling them. They want justice, they want water in their taps, they want their children to be safe, they want their cow to be fed, and they want to make sure that they can go do some work and come back in the evening. That's what they want.
Today in the Muslim world, it's become far easier to define what you're against, say Israel or American intervention, than what you're for. It never was a monolithic culture, but one would search hard to find a modern equivalent of the Ottomans, a Muslim power that the West sought to copy.
Mark Urban there. Well, to discuss the struggle within Islam, I was joined by the former Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, the scholar Reza Aslan, former Muslim Maryam Namasi, and from Lebanon by Omar Bakri Mohammed, the radical cleric who was banned from returning to Britain in 2005. Benazir Bhutto, first of all, we've heard all kinds of characterizations about Islam tonight, very, very different ones. Do you recognise Islam in crisis, or at least in a degree of ferment now?
I feel that the Muslim world is going through something that Europe went through earlier, which is the discussion on the role of the state in religious affairs. There are some people who would like the state to make laws that are in accordance with Islam, and there are others who say that God should judge an individual. So there's a struggle, one can say, between the church and the state.
Reza Aslan, you've written extensively, as I said, about an Islamic Reformation. What would you mean by that?
Well, it's a little bit like Ms. Bhutto just mentioned. You know, when we use the term Reformation, we have to define it. What we're talking about here is an internal struggle between institutions and individuals over who has the authority to define faith. This is a phenomenon that has occurred in all great religious traditions, and it's one that's been taking place within the Muslim world for most of the last century, quite frankly. We're seeing a rapid sense of individualization taking place throughout the Islamic world as Muslims begin to start thinking of themselves less as members of a worldwide community of faith and more as individual members of nation states. And that's created not so much a crisis within Islam, but a crisis within Islamic authority.
Have you kind of opted out of this in the sense that you've rejected the religion. You're not taking part fully in that debate then, presumably.
Oh, well, I mean, yes, I've opted out of religion because I think it's important to have freedom of religion as well as from religion. But I think that regardless, this is an issue for everybody, whether they consider themselves Muslims or not. I think what we need is not an Islamic reformation, though any sort of reform is welcome, though I think is not possible. We need an enlightenment.
When so many Muslims have written to this program, for example, saying Islam is of course a religion of peace, do you have any regret for some of the things which you have said which are clearly motivated by hatred?
First of all, we must, agreed here now that we are talking about a complete civilization called the Islamic civilization. And the golden age of Islam was in the time of the Caliphate. So Islam is not something we need to try. Islam was implemented for 1300 years and was the most successful system ever the mankind has really lived under, whereas Muslim and non-Muslims was living together. Muslim, Jews, Christian, Hindus was living together under the last Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate. Unfortunately, that is the crisis, the absence of the Islamic State. Islam is a rational belief, emanates from that complete system of life.
If you want Muslims and non-Muslims to live together, how does it help that when you say that London bombers who killed 52 people would go to paradise, the whole of Britain is a land of war, the non-believer has no sanctity for their own life or property? These are things which many Muslims and certainly non-Muslims find very offensive.
You see, all this is the stereotype of the Western media. Nobody said that. I think if I ever said that in the UK, I could myself be arrested. We was living in the UK, not in Zimbabwe. There's law and order.
You didn't
That's
say
why
these
I never
things.
been convicted in anything. Never. I was the first one to condemn the killing of innocent people. And I said we condemn the killing of innocent people in America, in Britain, in Spain. And I wish from you to condemn the killing of innocent people by the American British forces in Iraq and Afghanistan. We always said that.
I would like to touch here on the issue that there are a group of people within the Islamic world who are now saying that anybody who does not share your interpretation of religion, whether they are Christians, Jews, Hindus, or even Shias, the minority faith within Islam, they should be killed and you should have nothing to do with them. In my country, Pakistan, we have seen that this is, Shia mosques have been attacked and they in turn have attacked Sunni mosques.
So what should you do about that? How do you engage in that debate and stop that?
Well, I think one has to engage in it by teaching people in the schools that Islam is a different religion. Islam does not preach killing of innocents. Islam actually says you shall have your religion and I shall have mine. And what Baqvi Saab said just now is correct. During the time of the Khalifat or the great Mughals, the Muslims, Christians, Jews all lived side by side. But something has gone wrong since, with this new group of people who are saying that anybody who's outside the interpretation is an enemy.
Reza Aslan, do you agree with that? That there is something has gone wrong with a small group of people and that there is a growing group of people on the fringes who have that view?
I think that there's no question that there is a movement taking place within the Muslim world, a puritanical, Sunni, Arabocentric movement that seeks to return Islam to some kind of unadulterated and frankly purely imaginary past. And that movement has gained an enormous amount of influence since the beginning of the war on terror, and particularly since the war in Iraq, because their primary argument is that the Muslim world is under attack and they're the sole defenders. That has been a very popular, very appealing message to a lot of Muslims who, for a variety of reasons, feel that they themselves, that their values, their traditions, their very identity is under attack. And so I think in many ways, yes, indeed, there is this movement taking place. But it's such a small, such a fringe movement, but it gets an enormous amount of attention, as one would expect. And I think it's causing a lot of people to focus very, very clearly, like the former Muslim just said, that there can be no reformation in Islam, or the idea that there can be no Islam in democracy.
I mean, I think a clear example is the fact that when you have debates with Islamists, they change their opinions and say, well, we don't agree with the killing of innocent people. But if you press further, the question is who is deemed innocent? And you'll find find that not many people are actually deemed to be innocent. It's not a Muslim issue. It's not. The terrorism that we're faced with is not a Muslim terrorism. It's the work of Islamists, and it's not a fringe group. It's a very strong political movement which has state power in Iran and is implementing Sharia law in many countries.
I want to bring in Omar Bakri Mohammed again on this. I mean, do you think that the world that you would like to see can coexist with Western liberal democracies?
I believe it's about time now for the Western liberal democracy is to grow up and to realize there's another people living in this planet Earth. I think we are suffering from secular fundamentalism, which is rejecting the other and use violence against them. You reject the views of the Muslims and you use the violence in the name of the law and international community and so-called war against terrorism. I think it's about time we could coexist together, no compulsion in religion, nobody force upon anybody to embrace Islam, because Islam is about conviction, not about we force people to embrace it.
I believe there are some extremists. I'm seeing this in my country. They say we must kill people who do not agree with us. We must kill people randomly. We should go to a bazaar or a marketplace and kill innocents there. The Prophet of Islam said you cannot kill innocent people even in a just war. But they believe in killing innocents. And this has come from the Muslim Brotherhood. It has come from the Afghan jihad that was fought in the 80s. And these people have a political agenda.
That is wrong. I agree with you. If there is element like this who want to kill people just for the sake of it, that is completely wrong. The way we disagree about the American to bomb any place in Iraq and kill people innocent in Iraq and Afghanistan. Two wrong doesn't make right. Or what we are saying, we could coexist together. We could live together. When I was in Britain, I was the cause for stability. I was able to control the Muslim views. Yes, I have radical views, but my radical views did never ever led anybody to commit any crime or even to...
Reza Aslan, the point you touched on at the beginning of this conversation suggested to me that one of the reasons why people are looking to religious leaders like President Ahmadinejad and Sheikh Nasrullah is because there has been a failure of the secular leaders in Islamic society. Is that fair?
Ahmadinejad is not a religious leader. He's barely a political leader. The president of Iran has no power whatsoever. And most importantly, we're throwing around some generalizations here that are incredibly disturbing. Political Islam means a million different things, as does the term Islamism. To compare the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt to the Afghan jihadists is frankly absurd.
And you can watch the whole of that special programme on the website. Now, the floods across England and Wales this week have brought misery to thousands of homes. It's not just the often effluent-filled floodwaters, but the lack of power, drinking water and supplies, and the sense of helplessness that have caused so much despair. Two things seem certain. We're going to have to get used to more flooding in future, and we're going to have to deal with it a lot more effectively. Emily spoke to the head of the Environment Agency, Baroness Young, on Tuesday and asked why the response seems to have been so lacking.
I think the severity of this flood has been just unprecedented. I mean, Hull, for example, had a sixth of its entire year's rain in half a day. So we've seen huge events, but what they really have brought home is the sort of thing that can happen increasingly with climate change and some of the challenges that raises. And I think Hull is a really good example of it, where you've got the risk of flooding from the sea, the risk of flooding from the rivers, and water that comes up through the drains because of overtopping of the drainage systems. And the two big issues I think came out of the last month is we've got to do more to work out how we can climate change proof the drainage systems of our cities, and we've also got to do more, as was the case particularly in the Severn Valley, to really protect against these severe events some of the really important infrastructure like electricity, like telecommunications, like roads, like the water services, the sewage treatment works. If we're going to have these extreme events, we're going to have more extreme protection for those vital infrastructure.
Let me come back to that one in a second. Your first point, to protect a drainage system from climate change. Spell that one out for us if you can.
At the moment our drains are really designed to take average rainfall, not extreme
So you
rain.
just mean modernised to the point where they can take greater capacity?
Well, it's partly about capacity, partly about holding water back so it doesn't run straight into the drains and overflow them, and partly about less concrete that simply water runs off very fast and overwhelms the drainage system. So more porous concrete, ways of holding water back that allows bigger volumes of water to be managed effectively before it finally hits the rivers and then makes them overflow, or else hits the drains and makes them overflow. And that's about getting a kind of more strategic look at a whole city level or a whole community level to really engineer that in a way that allows it to be properly managed. Instead of the rather, you know, we started with the Victorian drains, we added on piecemeal. We've got to take a more strategic look forward.
So that is, if you like, the engineering aspect of this. What about the lessons, if you like, for the public to learn? Do we have to get used to our houses flooding? What do you say to those, for example, who weren't insured?
I certainly think that the public need to understand the level of risk they're facing. And one of the things they can do is either go onto our website or phone our floodline number, find out whether they are in a high-risk flood area and get advice from us in peacetime, as it were, rather than wartime, about how they prepare for a flood. Because though we can do a lot more, and we've been delighted with additional money from the government to do more for flood risk protection, we'll never ever be able to defend adequately against these very, very extreme events. You know, a 1 in 400 year event in Hull. So people have got to understand whether they're at a low risk or a high risk, and then they can take appropriate steps in advance.
As the boss of the Environment Agency, wider than, you know, set kitchens, would you rule out the building on floodplains?
We've always said that it's really important to understand that people need houses, but we need houses that are built in the right place, built with the right degree of flood protection, and particularly not built in ways and in places that make flood risk worse for other people. And there is plenty of space to do that in Britain if we get the decisions right about location. And we've now got tougher powers.
And say, we are worried about your failure to rule out building on floodplains. Have you said that yet?
Government very much, I think, recognises that inappropriate development of the floodplain is a real big problem, and the last few weeks' events have underlined that in spades. I think what is important is that the powers that we've now got to object to developments in the floodplain that are inappropriate, and that's not all development, because there are many places where there are already high standards of defence. If you think about London, very, very well protected.
Finally, forget YouTube. What about getting yourself on television proper? Well, one service in Belgium is offering viewers the chance to make and show their own films and reports and effectively run their own channels. Paul Mason's been to meet the people who really are broadcasting themselves.
I'm on a slow train to a small town, and it's in Belgium. Can life be any more exciting? I'm here because it's the first place in Europe to get do-it-yourself community television. It's based on the internet, but it's not like the internet, and people here say it's changed the whole way they communicate. Lommel in Flanders prides itself on being high-tech. Everybody here has an electronic ID card. So the government chose this place for an experiment. It works like this. You upload a film via the internet to a channel run by you. It's the same kind of technology as Sky Plus, except it's you, not Rupert Murdoch, who decides what's on it. Anybody with a set-top box can watch your channel, but they need your permission. Meet the men who run the Balendake channel. Paul is a van driver. The man in drag is a brickie. The guy with the car, a local odd-job man. Balendake is a relatively poor area where there's been tension between the Flemish, Turkish and Moroccan communities. They're filming a kind of public information film about how to deal with inter-ethnic problems. They spend most of their spare time doing this, and, says Paul, one of the film editors, it's all about changing the way the rest of the town sees this neighbourhood.
It means that we live together. That's one. And we want the other people look to us. We can work with a Turkish man, a Flemish man, or a Dutch man.
Time to consult the .com generation. These sixth formers are already dab hands at video editing. If they put their videos on YouTube, they could get an audience of millions. So why put them on a closed TV system where there's only hundreds of potential viewers?
Why would I show myself to everybody in the world? Like, I don't want to know other people that don't know from Japan and China to see my ass.
With local TV, you get feedback from people you know. If you put it on the internet, some asshole goes and tells you it's crap while he thinks it's good. But here you know the people and they give you honest reactions about how it is.
The whole experiment is being run and studied by sociologists at the University of Leuven.
With this type of application, we saw that you also have an interesting boost when you have face-to-face communication attached to it. When people can see your movie and can meet you on the street and say, "Oh, I really liked your movie."
It's a year into the experiment and the town is preparing for a big occasion, the Lommel TV Awards. It's not exactly the Oscars, but then again, Lommel is not exactly Los Angeles. What they lack in glamour, Lommel people make up for with a kind of small-town decency. Time to find out who's won.
En de winnaar is Balendijk West met het filmpje Buren.
It's the bricklayers and van drivers of Ballendick who revel in their 15 seconds of fame.
After the awards, some of the Balendijk West guys came up to me and said, "Oh, thank you, you've made me a star, I'm a star now, I felt like a star."
It's time to leave, and for me, the jury's out on this experiment. The internet turned the whole world into a village. This technology turns a small town into a village, but it's a nicer village. There's very little of the profanity and violence of the web, but a lot of the fun and anarchy survives. You can see why the state loves it, but for that very reason, I'm not sure it'll ever catch on.
Paul Mason there, and our own outlet for your films, Oh My Newsnight, is back. Following the roaring success of our first competition, we want to see your own efforts at making TV. Make us a short film, put it on the web, and send us the link. You'll find details on our website. Well, that's it, and I mean, that's really it. This is the last podcast edition of the Week on Newsnight. The BBC video podcast trial has now ended. We're sorry to say. You can still enjoy this programme on BBC News 24 at midnight every Friday night, or Saturday morning if you're being pedantic. And you can also watch it on the website bbc.co.uk/Newsnight. It just remains for me to say goodbye. Turn out the lights, someone.